Tonight, we're going to explore a theory that may be the most uncomfortable idea in the history of philosophy. Not because it proposes something frightening about the universe outside you, but because it proposes something unsettling about the universe inside you, about the thing you call your mind, about the thing you call your choices, about the thing you call yourself. The theory is called hard determinism. And what it says, stated directly, is this: every thought you have ever had, every decision you have ever made, every feeling you have ever experienced was already determined before you were born, before your parents were born, before the first human being drew breath. Every neuron that fires in your brain tonight follows physical laws set in motion at the beginning of the universe, 14 billion years ago. The feeling of choosing, the intimate, immediate, absolutely convincing sensation that you are right now, in this moment, deciding what to do, is not a real choice. It is the output of a physical system running its course. It is the last illusion, and it may be the one illusion you will never fully give up. By the end of tonight, you're going to understand the full philosophical history of this idea. From the ancient Greeks who first noticed the problem, through the 17th century thinkers who made it precise, to the 19th century mathematician who described a thought experiment so unsettling it has never been answered, to the 20th century neuroscientist who ran an experiment in 1983 that found something so troubling about the timing of decisions that it changed how many scientists think about consciousness. You're going to understand why smart, careful, rigorous people believe that free will is an illusion. And you're going to understand what happens to the way you live if you actually take that seriously. Before we get started, if you love exploring the depths of science and space as much as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It's a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now let's begin. There is a long list of beliefs that humans have had to give up about themselves over the centuries. Each surrender was painful, and each one required something that felt, at the time, like a kind of death. We had to give up the belief that the Earth was the center of the universe. Copernicus showed it wasn't. Galileo confirmed it. Bruno was burned at the stake for saying it out loud. The transition from feeling yourself to be at the center of everything, to knowing you are on a small planet circling an ordinary star in the outer arm of an unremarkable galaxy, took centuries and met ferocious resistance, not because people were stupid, because it felt important to be at the center, because the feeling of centrality was woven into the structure of meaning. We had to give up the belief that humans were fundamentally distinct from other animals. Darwin showed we weren't. We descended from the same ancestors every other living thing on this planet. The tree of life has no special branch reserved for beings with souls. The species we call human shares more than 98% of its DNA with the species we call chimpanzee. This too was resisted. Not because the evidence was thin, because it felt important to be different. Because being continuous with the animals felt like being reduced. We had to give up the belief that our memories were accurate records of the past. Cognitive science showed they weren't. Memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. Every time you remember something, you are partially rewriting it. What you call your personal history is partly a story you are continuously telling yourself, updating with each retelling. This was unsettling. We lean on memory for our identity. Being told it is unreliable feels like being told you cannot trust yourself. We had to give up the belief that our perceptions were faithful representations of external reality. Neuroscience showed they weren't. What you see is not the world. It is the brain's model of the world, constructed from incomplete data and filled in with assumptions, biases, and prior expectations. The color you see as red is not a property of objects. It is a response of your visual cortex to specific wavelengths. The solid table in front of you is mostly empty space. The unified, stable, clearly bounded world you experience is a production. Each of these was hard. Each required a descent from a privileged position. Center of the universe, gone. Chosen species, gone. Reliable autobiographer, gone. And now this. Free will. The belief that you are the author of your actions, that when you choose, something real is happening that is genuinely yours. That the future is open and you are doing something real when you deliberate about it. That praise and blame and pride and guilt all rest on something solid. This is not just another belief about the world. This is a belief about the inside of you. It is, perhaps, the last and deepest belief you have about what it means to be someone. And the argument is that it is wrong, that it has always been wrong, that every philosopher and neuroscientist and physicist who has looked at this problem carefully has come back with a version of the same troubling conclusion. You are not as free as you feel. You may not be free at all. This is not a comfortable thing to hear. It is not supposed to be comfortable. Comfort is not what this kind of thinking offers. What it offers instead is something stranger and perhaps more useful. A form of precision about what you are and how you work that may, if you can hold it without flinching, change the weight of some things you carry, the grinding self-blame for things you could not have done differently, the retributive anger at people who could not have chosen differently, the pride that takes sole credit for advantages that were largely given, the guilt that takes sole blame for disadvantages that were largely inherited. Hard determinism, if you follow it seriously, loosens all of these, not by eliminating them, by putting them in a different light, by asking how much of what you feel you chose was actually chosen, and what remains once you examine that question honestly. Tonight, we are going to follow that question all the way down. It goes a long way down. Get comfortable. This will take a while. And when we are done, when the last argument has been made and the last implication has been traced, you will be very close to sleep. And sleep, as it turns out, is the closest most of us ever come to feeling what the world is like without the illusion. We will get to that at the end. For now, let's start where you are, with the feeling itself, the feeling of being free. Before you can examine whether free will is an illusion, you have to take seriously the thing you are claiming is an illusion. Because the feeling of free will is extraordinarily vivid, extraordinarily immediate, and extraordinarily convincing. It is not a marginal or theoretical feature of experience. It is one of the most central facts of what it is like to be alive. Consider what happens when you make a decision. Not a trivial decision, a real one. You are considering whether to end a relationship that is no longer working, whether to leave a job that pays well but makes you miserable, whether to tell someone the truth when the truth will hurt them. You sit with the question. You feel the weight of the competing considerations. On one side, loyalty, comfort, the fear of change, the kindness of silence. On the other, honesty, growth, the long-term costs of staying in something wrong. You do not just wait for an answer to appear. You actively engage. You think through the scenarios. You imagine possible futures. You consult your values. You try to feel which choice aligns with the kind of person you want to be. And at some point, after all of this, you choose. Something settles. The scale tips in one direction, and there is a feeling, a very specific, very recognizable feeling, that the tipping was yours, that you did it, that you are responsible for what happens next. William James, one of the founders of modern psychology, tried to capture the character of this feeling. He called the moment of commitment the fiat, from the Latin for "let it be done." The fiat is the sense of authorship, the feeling of stepping forward into one possibility and closing the others. He thought this feeling was one of the most fundamental data of psychology. You cannot simply dismiss it. Whatever theory of free will you develop, James thought, it has to do justice to the fiat. It has to explain what it is and why it feels the way it does. The feeling extends backward through time in two important ways. The first is regret. Regret is not just the experience of a bad outcome. It is the experience of a bad outcome combined with the belief that you could have done otherwise. When you regret something, you are not just sad about what happened. You are blaming yourself, which means you are assuming that a different choice was available to you, that the outcome was not inevitable, that something real was at stake in the deliberation. If determinism is correct, if the outcome was fixed before you were born, then regret, strictly speaking, makes no sense. The thing that happened could not have been otherwise. It is as senseless to regret it as to regret the weather. But you do regret it. The feeling is immediate and powerful, and not obviously confused, even once you have thought through the argument against it. This is part of what makes the problem so persistent. The counter-arguments don't touch the feeling. The second extension is moral judgment. We hold other people responsible for their actions because we believe they chose. When someone lies to you, you are angry. You are not just treating them as a malfunctioning system. You are treating them as a person who had a choice and made the wrong one. The anger is specifically retributive. It is aimed at the agent, not just the act. This is not a quirk of human psychology. It is the foundation of every legal system, every moral code, every structure of praise and blame that human societies have ever developed. The entire edifice of human ethics rests on the assumption that people could have done otherwise, that responsibility is real, that praise and blame track something genuine. Hard determinism says they don't. But before we get there, we need to take the phenomenology seriously, because the question is not just whether free will is real. The question is why it feels so real, so immediate, so impossible to think around, even when you have followed the arguments against it carefully. Why is this particular illusion so persistent? What is the brain producing, and why is it producing it so convincingly? Start with the simplest observation. You feel free because you are not aware of the causes of your decisions. Baruch Spinoza said this in the 17th century, and it remains the most penetrating single sentence about the phenomenology of free will ever written. We call ourselves free because we are conscious of our desires and ignorant of the causes by which those desires are determined. Think about it. You decide to reach for a glass of water. Why? Because you are thirsty. Why are you thirsty? Because of complex physiological processes in your body, involving osmolality sensors in the hypothalamus, that you have no direct access to. You did not decide to be thirsty. Thirst happened to you, but the decision to drink feels free because you are aware of the desire and unaware of the mechanism that generated it. The same structure applies to every decision you make. You decide to call a friend because you feel lonely. You did not decide to feel lonely. Loneliness happened to you. You decide to stay at work late because you feel anxious about an unfinished project. You did not decide to feel anxious. Anxiety happened to you. The desires that move you to action are not chosen. They arise, and the decisions are downstream of those desires. The feeling of freedom is the experience of acting from desires that you identify with, without being aware of how those desires were produced. But being unaware of a cause does not mean the cause is absent. Here is an analogy. You are in a car, being driven somewhere. The car has tinted windows. You cannot see out. You have no idea where you are going or what route you are taking. From the inside, you feel as if you are simply sitting still, not going anywhere, not being moved. But from the outside, you are clearly in motion, on a road, heading toward a destination. Your ignorance of the movement does not mean the movement is not happening. The feeling of free will is the sensation of being in the car with tinted windows. You are being moved by causes, by prior states, by the deep deterministic structure of your neural activity, and you cannot see out. So it feels like you are sitting still, like you are the one doing the moving, like the motion is originating from you. But the causes are there. The road is there. The destination was set before you got in the car. This is the problem. Not that the feeling is unreal. The feeling is absolutely real. Feelings are always real as feelings. The question is whether the feeling is tracking something real in the world, or whether it is the brain's narrative about a process that is running without the input the narrative claims it has. The question is whether the sense of authorship is authorship, or just the sense of it. Let's look at the philosophical tradition that has been building the case against it for 24 centuries. The argument against free will is ancient. It did not begin with neuroscience. It did not begin with modern physics. It began with the first serious attempt to understand what the world is made of. Democritus, born around 460 BCE, proposed that everything in the universe was made of tiny, indivisible particles, atoms moving through empty space. Not just rocks and water and fire. Everything, including the human body, including the brain, including thought. If the universe is atoms and void, and atoms move according to fixed laws, then human thought, being itself atomic in constitution, moves according to those same fixed laws. There is no room in this picture for anything that escapes causation. The human mind is part of nature. Nature is governed by necessity. Therefore, the human mind is governed by necessity. The Stoic philosophers, who dominated Greek and Roman philosophy for centuries after Democritus, took this seriously. Fate, they called it hymarmene. The great causal chain was woven through everything. Every event had a prior cause. The future was fixed. What would happen, would happen. The wise response was not to resist this reality, but to understand it. To accept what cannot be changed with equanimity. To act as fate requires, but to act from understanding rather than from struggle. The Stoics did not think this collapsed the distinction between virtue and vice. A person could act well or badly within fate's structure. The badness was in the character. The character was formed causally, but it was still that person's character, not someone else's. They threaded the needle between determinism and responsibility in a way that anticipated what we now call compatibilism. But they were clear on the underlying reality. The chain of causation runs through you. These ancient intuitions were philosophical speculations, not scientific theories. The argument for determinism became precise and became genuinely alarming with the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Isaac Newton in 1687 published the Principia Mathematica. It was arguably the greatest single scientific achievement in human history. It gave a precise mathematical account of how objects move on Earth and in the heavens under the influence of forces. The equations were not merely descriptive. They were predictive with extraordinary accuracy. Given the position and velocity of an object now, Newton's equations told you exactly where it would be at any future time. Given the positions and velocities of the planets, you could predict eclipses centuries in advance. The universe, at least at the scale of planets and projectiles, was a machine, a precise clockwork machine, running according to laws that could be written down and solved. The implications for human beings were not lost on the philosophers who followed. Baruch Spinoza was born in Amsterdam in 1632, and he stands as perhaps the most radical and most rigorous systematic philosopher in the Western tradition. His major work, The Ethics, published posthumously in 1677, is written in the style of a geometric proof definitions, axioms, propositions, demonstrations, corollaries. It is perhaps the most ambitious attempt ever made to derive all of philosophy from first principles with the rigor of mathematics. Spinoza's metaphysics was thoroughgoing monism. There is one substance, he called it God or nature, and everything that exists is a mode of that substance. Human beings are not separate from nature. They are not exempt from its laws. The idea that human thought and will operate outside the causal order of the universe is, for Spinoza, simply false. It is an illusion generated by ignorance of causes. His famous statement bears repeating in full, because nothing in 23 centuries of philosophy since has improved on it. Men think themselves free because they are aware of their wishes and desires, but are ignorant of the causes by which those wishes and desires are determined. This is the key. Spinoza is not saying that your wishes and desires are unreal. He is saying that your wishes and desires are themselves effects of prior causes that you do not see. The decision to eat feels free because you can see the desire to eat but not the mechanisms in your hypothalamus and bloodstream that generated the desire. The decision to stay kind in a difficult conversation feels free because you can see the intention to be kind, but not the long causal history, childhood, upbringing, experience, neural architecture that form the character from which that intention arises. Awareness of the wish, unawareness of its causes. That is the anatomy of the illusion. At almost the same moment, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was developing a different, but equally deterministic picture. Leibniz believed in pre-established harmony, the idea that God had designed the universe as an enormous, perfectly synchronized machine in which every element operates according to its own internal law, but in perfect harmony with every other element. Like a room full of clocks, all set to the same time, all ticking independently, but all showing the same moment. Nothing interacts causally in Leibniz's universe. Everything runs from its own internal program, but the programs are pre-harmonized. This is a strange picture, but its implication for free will is the same as Spinoza's. Your decisions are part of your internal program. God designed you with that program. The program will produce those decisions. The decisions feel like choices from inside the program, but they were settled in God's design before the world began. The 18th century brought the argument further into materialist territory. Julien Offray de la Mettrie, a French physician and philosopher, published L'Homme Machine Man, a Machine in 1748. La Mettrie's argument was blunt. The human body is a machine, a very complicated machine, far more intricate than any clock or cannon, but a machine nonetheless operating according to physical principles, with no ghost in it, no immaterial soul directing operations from outside the flesh. The brain generates thought the way the liver generates bile, La Mettrie said. It is an organ with a function. The function is to produce the behaviors we call thinking and willing and choosing. There is nothing in the function that escapes the physical substrate. The sense that something immaterial is in charge is an artifact of the machine's complexity. Paul Henry Theory, Baron d'Holbach, pushed the argument to its logical conclusion in The System of Nature in 1770. The universe, d'Holbach wrote, is a vast machine in which every motion follows necessarily from prior motions. The human being is a part of this machine. All human actions, including everything we call choice, are effects of causes that extend backward in an unbroken chain to the origin of things. To say that a human being is free is as nonsensical as to say that a clock is free to show whatever time it wishes. The machine runs, The human believes they are steering it. The belief is produced by the machine. Determinism of this kind was shocking in the 18th century. It had religious implications. If humans were not free, they could not be held morally responsible before God. It had political implications if criminals were not free. The entire structure of legal punishment was brought into question. And it had personal implications if your most cherished decisions were mechanical outputs rather than genuine choices. Something deeply important about who you thought you were was at stake. These implications have not become less disturbing in the 3 centuries since. But the scientific case for them has grown immeasurably stronger. Newton's mechanics, extended to chemistry and then to biology, eventually produced a picture of the human brain that Spinoza and Lemaitre had only intuited. The brain is a physical organ. It operates according to the laws of physics and chemistry. Those laws, as far as we can tell, do not have special exemptions for the neurons that happen to be producing thoughts. You are made of atoms. Your thoughts are made of atoms. Your atoms follow the laws of physics. This is the foundation. This is the first domino. The next is the most elegant and most horrifying formulation of what follows. In 1814, the French mathematician and astronomer Pierre-Simon Laplace published a philosophical essay on probabilities. In the introduction, almost as a casual observation, he described a thought experiment that has haunted philosophy ever since. He wrote, "We may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its past and the cause of its future, an intellect which at a certain moment would know all forces that set nature in motion, and all positions of all items of which nature is composed, if this intellect were also vast enough to submit these data to analysis. It would embrace in a single formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes." This hypothetical intellect has been called Laplace's demon. Take a moment to understand exactly what Laplace is describing. He is not describing a being with supernatural powers or divine foresight. He is describing a purely mechanical consequence of Newton's laws. If Newton's equations correctly describe how everything moves, and if you know the position and velocity of every particle in the universe right now, then you can plug those values into the equations and calculate the state of every particle at any future moment. The calculation is, in principle, complete. Nothing is left undetermined. The future is entirely contained in the present. The demon is not predicting the future. The demon is computing it. The way a calculator computes the sum of 2 numbers. The way a calculator doesn't guess or estimate, it derives. The future of the universe is a derivation from its present state, just as the sum of 2 and 2 is a derivation from the axioms of arithmetic. Given the inputs, the output is fixed. Now put yourself inside this picture. Your brain is a physical object. It is made of approximately 86 billion neurons, each of which is made of atoms and molecules operating according to the laws of chemistry and physics. Right now, as you lie here thinking, a specific pattern of electrochemical activity is happening across those neurons. That pattern is the physical substrate of your current mental state, your thoughts, your feelings, the particular quality of your awareness right now. Laplace's demon knows the position and velocity of every atom in your brain. It knows the concentration of every neurotransmitter in every synapse. It knows the current state of every ion channel in every neuron. And from those conditions, plus the laws of chemistry and physics, it derives the next state of your brain, and the next, and the next, including the state that corresponds to your deciding what to do next, including the state that corresponds to your conviction that you are choosing freely. The demon sees what you call your deliberation and your choice as a sequence of physical states, each state causing the next, with no gaps, no insertions, no input from an agent above or outside the physical process. From the demon's perspective, there is no deliberating self-hovering above the brain, feeding intentions down into the neural machinery. There is only the neural machinery itself, processing and producing the next state, including the state that feels, from inside, like deliberation. This is not saying that your deliberation is unreal. The deliberation is real. It is a real physical process happening in your real physical brain, and it has real causal consequences for what you do next. The determinist does not deny the existence of deliberation. The determinist denies that deliberation is free in the libertarian sense, the sense that says you could have deliberated differently given exactly the same prior conditions. You could not have. Not because you were compelled or forced, but because the prior conditions determined the deliberation, just as the prior conditions determine every other physical event. The compulsion is not external. It is deeper than external. It is structural. A cannonball follows its arc. You could not throw it any other way if you kept the conditions exactly the same. The powder charge, the angle of the barrel, the density of the air. The ball goes where the physics says it goes. You go where the physics says you go. You feel different from the cannonball because you are on the inside of your own trajectory. The cannonball has no inside. But the inside does not change the trajectory. There are three responses to Laplace's demon, and we need to address all three honestly. The first response is that the demon is physically impossible, for two reasons. First, quantum mechanics introduces genuine indeterminacy at the subatomic level, not just unpredictability, but genuine non-determinism. The demon cannot know the exact position and velocity of a particle simultaneously, because the Heisenberg uncertainty principle says those quantities cannot both be precisely defined. Second, chaos theory shows that even in classical systems, tiny differences in initial conditions produce wildly different outcomes over time. The atmosphere is the canonical example. A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can, in principle, affect whether a hurricane forms in Texas. The demon's calculation is practically impossible, because even vanishingly small errors in knowing the initial conditions would compound catastrophically over any significant time span. We will return to these objections in their own section, because they are important and they are not trivial, but they are also ultimately not decisive. Quantum indeterminacy replaces causal necessity with random probability. Random probability is not freedom. A decision made by a random quantum event in a neural microtubule is not a free decision. It is a random decision. And chaos theory shows that the future is practically unpredictable, not that it is ontologically undetermined. The butterfly's wing flap does not create a new causal chain from nothing. It is the beginning of a causal chain that was itself caused. The demon's calculation is impossible in practice. Whether the underlying reality is deterministic or merely chaotic remains a separate question. The second response is compatibilism. Maybe Laplace's demon is logically coherent, but it is irrelevant to the question of free will, as we actually care about it. We will spend a full section on this response later, because it is serious and because it is the position of most professional philosophers today. But the short version is, compatibilism redefines free will, rather than defending it. It says free will is compatible with determinism. But the free will it is talking about is not the libertarian free will that most people mean when they say they have free will. The hard determinist accepts the compatibilist description of human behavior and says, yes, all of that is true, but it is not the same as genuine authorship, genuine openness to alternatives, genuine ultimate responsibility. The third response is to accept that the demon is essentially right, to sit with what that means, to follow the implications. The implications include this. If the demon's calculation is correct, then your next thought is already determined, not just in principle, but in fact. The pattern of neural activity that will constitute your next thought is right now. The necessary consequence of the pattern of neural activity that is happening right now, which is the necessary consequence of the pattern that preceded it, which is the necessary consequence of what preceded that, going back in an unbroken chain to the initial conditions of the universe at the moment of the Big Bang. Your next thought was settled at the Big Bang. Your decision about what to do tomorrow was settled at the Big Bang. Everything that you will be proud of, and everything that you will regret, and everything that you will choose, and everything that you will refuse, all of it was settled 14 billion years ago. There is something dizzying about this when you really follow it. Not the intellectual acknowledgement of it. The intellectual acknowledgement is easy, but the felt sense of it. The moment when you try to hold it as a real fact about your life, rather than as an abstract proposition. The block universe, the picture from physics in which all moments in time are equally real. Past and future and present, all existing together as parts of a four-dimensional structure, adds another dimension to the discomfort. In the block universe, the decision you will make tomorrow exists now. It is already there, in the four-dimensional structure, at the location of your brain on Tuesday. You haven't experienced it yet, but it is already real. Your choices are not ahead of you, waiting to be made. They are already there, in the structure of space-time, waiting to be encountered. From inside, they feel like open futures. From outside, from the demon's perspective, from the block universe's perspective, they are already closed. That gap between inside and outside is the territory we are mapping tonight. And no one mapped it more precisely than a neuroscientist in San Francisco in 1983. The argument against free will was for most of history a philosophical argument. Spinoza's claim, d'Holbach's claim, Laplace's claim. These were all deductive arguments, from premises about the nature of causation and the physical constitution of the brain. They were compelling as arguments, but they were not empirical. They did not go into the brain and looked. Benjamin Libet went into the brain and looked. Libet was a neurophysiologist at the University of California, San Francisco. In the early 1980s, he designed an experiment to address what seemed like a simple question. When does the decision to make a voluntary movement actually happen in the brain? Not when does the movement happen. Not when does the intention to move arrive in consciousness. When does the brain begin the process that results in the movement? And how does that timing relate to conscious awareness? The experimental setup was elegant. Subjects sat in front of a clock specifically, a cathode ray oscilloscope displaying a dot moving in a circle at a known speed, completing one rotation every 2.56 seconds. Electrodes were attached to the scalp to record EEG activity, and specifically to measure a well-known brainwave component called the Bereitschaft's potential, or readiness potential, a slow negative electrical shift in the motor cortex that had been identified by Hans Kornhuber and Ludovici in 1965 as a brain signal preceding voluntary movement. The task was simple. When you feel like it, whenever the urge arises, spontaneously, with no external cue, flex your right wrist. Note the position of the dot on the clock face at the moment you first feel the urge or intention to move. That's all. Flex your wrist when you feel like it, and remember when you first felt like it. Libet's findings, published in the journal Brain in 1983, were quietly explosive, and they have reverberated through neuroscience, philosophy, and psychology ever since. Here is what he found. The readiness potential, the slow buildup of electrical activity preceding voluntary movement, began, on average, approximately 550 milliseconds. before the movement itself. Half a second before the wrist flexed, the brain was already in the process of preparing it. The subjects reported their first conscious awareness of the urge to move at approximately 200 milliseconds before movement. 0.2 of a second before the wrist flexed, they became aware of wanting to flex it. The arithmetic is inescapable. The brain began the preparation for the movement 550 ms before the movement. Consciousness of the intention arrived only 200 ms before the movement, which means the brain was already 350 milliseconds into its preparation before the person knew they were about to move. 350 milliseconds. More than a third of a second of unconscious neural preparation before the conscious sense of intending to move arrived. The implication, stated plainly, the decision to move was not made consciously. It was made by the brain at the neural level. And then the consciousness of deciding, the sense of being the author of the decision, arrived later, after the fact, like a press release issued about an event that had already been scheduled. Consciousness on this reading is not in the driving seat. It is in the back seat, being told what decisions have been made, experiencing those decisions as its own choices. Libet himself was troubled by this conclusion. He was not a determinist by temperament, and he was careful in his claims. He proposed a partial rescue. Even if consciousness cannot initiate a decision, perhaps it can veto one. The readiness potential starts the process. Consciousness arrives 200 ms before movement. That still leaves 200 ms in which a conscious veto could theoretically be applied. The conscious mind could theoretically say no at the last moment, even if it couldn't say yes first. This became known as the veto hypothesis. Libet suggested that perhaps free will operates not as the capacity to initiate actions, but as the capacity to inhibit them. We are not the authors of our impulses, but we can be the editors. The veto hypothesis is interesting, but it faces an immediate problem. What determines whether you veto? If you are about to do something impulsive and you veto it, what caused the veto? More brain activity, a different neural pattern, generated by prior neural patterns, following physical laws. The veto is itself caused. The decision to veto is itself a physical event in the brain with a prior causal history. You have not escaped the chain. You have moved the mystery one step back. The research did not stop with Libet. In 2008, a team led by Chun Seong-soon at the Max Planck Institute published a study in Nature Neuroscience that extended his findings dramatically. Using fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, which tracks blood flow in the brain with much higher spatial resolution than EEG, they found that the outcome of a freely made decision could be predicted from patterns of neural activity up to 10 seconds before the subject reported making the decision. 10 seconds, not 350 milliseconds. 10 full seconds of prior brain activity that contained, encoded in its patterns, the decision the person would report making 10 seconds later. The subjects were pressing one of two buttons, freely choosing which one and when. 10 seconds before they felt they made the choice, the brain pattern already contained information that predicted which button they would press. The conscious sense of choosing the fiat, in James's language, came a decade of neural computation after the outcome was already written in the neural activity. This result was extensively replicated and extended. John Dylan Haynes and colleagues found similar effects with increasing precision. The technology for reading brain states improved, and with each improvement, the prediction window grew and the predictive accuracy increased. The subjective sense of deciding, these studies suggest, is a kind of confabulation. The brain has already processed the inputs, weighted the options, and determined the output. Then it generates the experience of deliberation and choice as a narrative about that process. the narrative feels real. The narrative is real, in the sense that it is a real experience. But it may be a reconstruction rather than an accurate report of how the decision was made. Consider the evidence from neurological damage. Phineas Gage was a railroad construction foreman in Vermont in 1848, responsible, careful, well-liked by his crew. In September of that year, an accidental explosion drove a tamping iron, an iron rod 3 feet 7 inches long and 1¼ inches in diameter, through his skull. It entered through his left cheek, passed through his brain, and exited through the top of his head. He survived. The physical Phineas Gage survived, but the man his co-workers and family knew did not. His doctor, John Martin Harlow, reported the transformation in detail. The balance between his intellectual faculties and his animal propensities had been disturbed. He was fitful, irreverent, grossly profane, impatient, obstinate, capricious and vacillating. His friends said he was no longer Gage. His choices changed. His values changed. His personality changed, all because a rod passed through a specific region of his prefrontal cortex. If choices came from something above or outside the brain, from a free will operating independently of the physical substrate, they should not change when you damage the physical substrate. But they do. Change the brain, change the choices. This is not an isolated case. It is reproduced across thousands of neurological and psychiatric cases. Frontotemporal dementia removes social inhibitions and moral judgment. Patients who were previously kind and considerate become inappropriate, impulsive, sometimes cruel, not because they chose to be different, because the neural substrate of their values was damaged. Parkinson's disease, when treated with dopaminergic medications, sometimes produces compulsive gambling and hypersexuality, as side effects not because the patient wants to gamble compulsively, but because the medication has altered the dopamine system in ways that change the reward processing that underlies the behavior we call wanting. Obsessive-compulsive disorder involves thoughts and behaviors that the sufferer explicitly does not want and cannot stop. The compulsion is not chosen. It arises from a specific pattern of neural dysfunction. The person experiences themselves as a spectator of their own unwanted behavior. This is a window into what the determinist claims is always true, of everyone that behavior is produced by neural processes, and the sense of willing it comes afterward, or alongside, or in spite of. Sam Harris, the philosopher and neuroscientist, states the hard version of this conclusion with characteristic directness. You did not choose your parents, your genes, your upbringing, your culture, your language, the shape of your brain, the pattern of your neural connections. You did not choose the desires that move you to act, or the thoughts that arise in your consciousness. Thoughts appear. You did not summon them. Feelings arise. You did not choose to feel them. The sense of authorship, the feeling that you are the one producing the thoughts, is itself a thought, produced by the same automatic processes. You cannot find, if you look honestly and carefully, the moment at which you took over, the moment at which the prior causes stopped, and you specifically, as a free, uncaused agent, began. The brain produces the experience of being the agent. It does not follow that there is an agent. Let's go down to the level of the neuron, because the argument from the physics of the brain is distinct from the philosophical argument and the neuroscientific argument, and each layer reinforces the others. A neuron is a cell, a particular kind of cell, with a particular architecture, a cell body, branching input fibers called dendrites, and a long output fiber called an axon. The neuron receives electrical and chemical signals through its dendrites from many other neurons, integrates those signals in the cell body, and when the integrated signal exceeds a threshold, fires an action potential, a brief, standardized electrical pulse, down the axon to its output connections. The action potential is an electrochemical event. It involves the rapid opening and closing of ion channels in the cell membrane protein molecules that allows specific charged atoms, principally sodium and potassium, to flow in or out of the cell according to their concentration gradients and electrical gradients. The flow of ions changes the electrical potential across the membrane. When the potential reaches the threshold, approximately -55 millivolts, the action potential fires. Whether the threshold is reached depends on the incoming signals. The incoming signals are the outputs of other neurons, transmitted across tiny gaps called synapses. At a synapse, the action potential in the presynaptic neuron triggers the release of neurotransmitter molecules, serotonin, dopamine, glutamate, GABA, and dozens of others that diffuse across the synaptic gap and bind to receptor proteins on the postsynaptic neuron, either exciting it, pushing it toward threshold, or inhibiting it, pushing it away from threshold. This is the mechanism. This is what is happening in your brain right now. In 86 billion neurons and something on the order of 100 trillion synaptic connections, at a rate of hundreds of electrical signals per second in the most active neurons. Every event in this mechanism follows known physical laws. The diffusion of neurotransmitters across the synaptic gap follows the laws of statistical thermodynamics molecules, moving from higher to lower concentration, according to Fick's law of diffusion. The binding of neurotransmitters to receptors follows the laws of molecular biology, ligand-receptor interactions governed by binding affinities and concentrations. The opening of ion channels follows the laws of electrochemistry, ions moving according to their electrochemical gradients. The propagation of action potentials follows the Hodgkin-Huxley equations, a precise mathematical description of how membrane potential changes as a function of the conductances of sodium and potassium. Channels. None of these laws have exemptions. The neurotransmitter molecule does not check whether you want to feel motivated before it binds to your dopamine receptor. The sodium ion does not pause to respect your autonomy before it floods across the membrane and pushes your neuron toward firing. The electrochemical events proceed according to physics, regardless of what you would prefer. Trace the causal chain backward from a specific decision, say, the decision you are right now making about whether to keep listening to this or try to fall asleep. The decision will be produced by the current state of your brain. That state was produced by the state of your brain a few seconds ago, modified by the sensory input from this audio. That sensory input is itself processed according to the neural architecture you have developed over your lifetime. That architecture was shaped by every experience you have had, the things you learned, the things that excited you, the things that frightened you, the patterns of thought and response that were reinforced through repetition. Go back further. That architecture was also shaped by your development in the womb, by your genetic predispositions, by the particular configuration of neurons you were born with, by the concentration of hormones in your fetal environment. Go back further still, to your parents' genetics, to their parents' genetics, to the long chain of evolutionary pressure that produced the kind of brain you have, going back hundreds of millions of years to the first nervous systems. You did not choose any of this. You were produced by all of this. And the decision you make right now is the current output of the system that was produced by all of this. This is not abstract. This is literal. Every neuron in your brain right now is in the state it is in because of prior causes that you did not control. Every thought you have tonight is the lawful consequence of the physical state of your brain, which is the lawful consequence of every prior state, going back before you were born. Consider consciousness itself, your sense of being aware, of experiencing things, of being the subject of your own life. Even this is a physical process. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has spent decades studying how the brain constructs the experience of self. His conclusion, documented in books like The Feeling of What Happens and Self Comes to Mind, is that consciousness, including the experience of being a subject who makes choices, is a neural construction, assembled from the interactions of many brain systems, with no single location and no single mechanism, but rather an emergent property of the brain's integration of information about the body, the environment, and the self's own history. The self is made. It is not given. It is assembled from neural processes, moment by moment, and the assembly follows physical laws. There is a famous thought experiment in philosophy of mind, the one about the homunculus. The homunculus problem arises when you try to explain consciousness or decision-making by positing a little person inside the brain who does the conscious experiencing and the decision-making. The homunculus sees the perceptions, weighs the options, makes the choice. But then you need to explain how the homunculus works, and you are tempted to posit another little person inside the homunculus, and so on to infinity. Hard determinism offers a clean solution to the homunculus problem. There is no homunculus. There is no agent behind the processes supervising them. There are just the processes. The sense that there is someone behind them. The sense of being a subject is itself produced by the processes. The experience of agency is itself a brain state. This does not mean you don't exist. It means what you are is different from what you thought you were. You are not a free agent inhabiting a body. You are a body, a brain, that has the experience of being a free agent. The experience is produced by the same mechanism that produces all other experiences. It is not more or less real than any other experience. But it is not accurate in its implicit claim that there is a free self above the physics. You are the physics, all the way down. The experience of being above the physics is itself physics. This is what the hard determinist means when they say free will is an illusion. Not that the experience of choosing is unreal. It is real. Not that deliberation does not occur. It occurs. But that the experience's implicit claim that there is a free agent doing the choosing, a self that could have chosen otherwise, given exactly the same conditions, is a claim that the physical evidence does not support. Every thought is the output of a physical process. Every physical process follows physical laws. Physical laws do not have gaps for freedom to live in. The feeling of freedom is the brain reporting on a process that has already been determined. The report is accurate that the process happened. It is inaccurate in its attribution of authorship. You are not thinking thoughts. Thoughts are thinking you. The hardest part of this conversation, for anyone who engages with it seriously, is that the best credentialed philosophers who spend their careers thinking about free will are mostly not hard determinists. They are compatibilists. They believe that free will is compatible with determinism. They believe that the two positions are not in genuine conflict, and that the hard determinist has made a philosophical error by assuming they are. The compatibilist position is intellectually serious. It deserves careful attention. And it has a response. But the response takes some work. Compatibilism begins with a question. What do we actually mean by free will? If we unpack what we mean when we say someone acted freely, when we say the action was genuinely theirs, that they deserve credit or blame for it, what is the content of that claim? The compatibilist argues that what we mean is something like this. The person acted because of their own desires, beliefs, and values, without external compulsion. And they were capable of responding to reasons. A person who is threatened at gunpoint is not acting freely, even if their desires are unconstrained, because external force has entered the picture. A person in the grip of an irresistible compulsion, a phobia, an addiction, may be acting without external compulsion, but is still not free. Because their higher-order values, the values they reflectively endorse, are being overridden by lower-order impulses they would rather not have. The concept of a free action, on the compatibilist account, is the concept of an action that flows from the person's own character, values, and reasoning, under conditions that allow for rational deliberation. That is what we care about when we ask whether someone acted freely, not whether their neural states were caused by prior neural states, but whether their action was theirs in the sense of expressing who they are. Harry Frankfurt made the most influential philosophical contribution to this view in his 1971 paper, Freedom of the Will and the Concept of a Person. Frankfurt distinguished between first-order desires wanting to do something and second-order desires wanting to do something, or wanting not to want to do it. He argued that freedom of will consists in the alignment of a person's first-order desires with their second-order desires. Freedom is having the will you want to have. A wanton Frankfurt's term is someone who has first-order desires, but no second-order desires. Animals are mostly wantons on this account. They want things. They do not want to want things in any reflective sense. A wanton acts from their desires, but has no stance on their desires. A person, by contrast, has second-order desires. They have views about their own desires. They endorse some of their desires and are ambivalent about or ashamed of others. A person who is addicted to alcohol and hates their addiction has a first-order desire for alcohol, they want to drink, and a second-order desire not to have that desire, they wish they could stop wanting it. Such a person is in a kind of internal conflict. Their behavior is unfree in the relevant sense they are acting against the desires they endorse, at the mercy of desires they do not endorse. Freedom, on Frankfurt's account, is acting from the desires you identify with, not the desires that happen to be present in you, but the desires you would, on reflection, endorse as your own. This is the sense of freedom that matters morally and practically. And this sense of freedom is perfectly compatible with determinism. Whether or not your second-order desires were caused by prior causes, acting from them is still a form of freedom. Daniel Dennett developed the most comprehensive and philosophically sophisticated compatibilism in books like Elbow Room and Freedom Evolves. Dennett's argument is partly about redefining the question. The free will worth wanting, Dennett argues, is not the libertarian free will that the determinist is denying. Libertarian free will, the freedom to have done otherwise, given exactly the same prior conditions, is, Dennett agrees, incompatible with determinism. But it is also an incoherent concept. What would it even mean to have done otherwise given exactly the same conditions? It would mean the action was random, determined by nothing. That is not freedom. That is chaos. The freedom worth wanting is the freedom to respond to reasons, to deliberate, to form intentions and act on them, to change behavior in response to evidence and argument. This is a real capacity. It varies across individuals, across species, across moments. A rock does not have it. A worm has it in minimal form. A dog has it in moderate form. A psychopath has it in impaired form. A reflective, rational, emotionally regulated adult human has it in its richest form. And this capacity is entirely compatible with determinism. Being caused to deliberate carefully is not the same as being forced to act against your will. Being determined to be the kind of person who changes their mind in response to evidence is not the same as being compelled. The compatibilist position is not obviously wrong. Many of the most careful philosophers alive hold it. And the compatibilist account of human freedom does track something real. The difference between acting from your own reasoned values and acting under coercion or compulsion is a real and important difference. So what is the hard determinist's response? The response is compatibilism redefines free will instead of defending it. The question everyone actually cares about when they ask whether they are free is not whether they are acting from their own desires, rather than external compulsion. The question is whether they could have done otherwise, whether the future is genuinely open, whether their deliberation is making a real difference to what happens, in a sense that doesn't reduce to just being one more physical cause in a chain. When you feel the weight of a decision, when you lie awake wondering whether you made the right choice, when you hold someone responsible for a harm they caused, when you feel proud of something you achieved, the concept you are using is not the compatibilist one. You are not asking whether the action flowed from your values unconstrained by external force. You are asking whether you, given everything about you in that moment, could have chosen differently. Whether the future was open, whether something real was at stake. And to that question, determinism says no, the decision was determined. The future was not open in the relevant sense. The deliberation was real, it was a real physical process, with real causal consequences, but it could not have gone differently given the exact prior conditions. Frankfurt's second-order desires are real. Dennett's capacity to respond to reasons is real. But both of those capacities were themselves determined. The values you identify with, the reasons you find compelling, the kind of person you are, at second order all of that was produced by causes you did not choose. You did not choose your genetics. You did not choose your upbringing. You did not choose the early experiences that shaped your values. You did not choose the neurological constitution that determines your emotional profile, your intelligence, your capacity for self-reflection. You are acting from your own character, yes, but you did not choose your character. Your character happened to you. This is the moral luck problem, articulated most sharply by Thomas Nagel and Bernard Williams. Two people make the same reckless decision. One happens to injure someone. One happens not to, purely by chance. We treat them very differently morally. We hold the first more responsible. But the only difference between them is luck, the luck of whether someone was in the path of the car. The underlying decision, the underlying recklessness, was identical. Moral luck exposes the fragility of our attribution of responsibility. Our judgments track outcomes, not underlying agents, because outcomes are affected by factors outside the agent's control. But moral luck goes deeper than circumstances. The character from which your choices flow was itself a matter of luck. Whether you were born with a predisposition to anxiety or calm, to empathy or coldness, to impulse control or impulsivity, this was not chosen. Whether you grew up in an environment that nurtured your better impulses or suppressed them, this was not chosen. The very capacity that Frankfurt says makes you free, the capacity to have second-order desires, to endorse your own values, this capacity itself varies across people, and the variation is not chosen. It was determined by genetics and environment. Free will, on the compatibilist account, requires being the kind of person who has it. And being the kind of person you are was determined before you were born. Compatibilism is the most comfortable place to stop. It honors the importance of deliberation and character. It preserves the structure of praise and blame. It allows moral responsibility to function. It does not require you to abandon the concepts of virtue and vice, but it does not fully address the question you started with. It redirects it. And if you do not let the question be redirected, if you press it all the way down, you are left with the hard, determinist conclusion. You are what you are because of causes you did not choose. The choices you make flow from the person you are. You did not choose to be this person. Therefore, in the deepest sense, you did not choose these choices. The chain goes all the way back, all the way to the beginning. At this point in the argument, many people reach for quantum mechanics. It is an understandable move. Quantum mechanics is the most fundamental and complete physical theory we have. And quantum mechanics is explicitly non-deterministic. At the subatomic level, according to quantum theory, certain events are genuinely random, not just unpredictable in practice, but genuinely undetermined by prior causes. The decay of a radioactive atom, for example, does not happen because anything caused it to happen at that moment. It happens with a certain probability per unit time, and the specific moment of decay is, as far as quantum mechanics is concerned, caused by nothing. If the physical world contains genuine randomness, Laplace's demon is, strictly speaking, impossible. The demon cannot compute the future because the future contains events that cannot be computed, events that are not the necessary consequence of any prior conditions, but simply happen. The clockwork universe of Newton and Laplace is replaced by a probabilistic universe where some events are genuinely undetermined. Roger Penrose, the Oxford mathematician and physicist, and Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist at the University of Arizona, proposed the most ambitious version of the quantum rescue argument. Their theory, called orchestrated objective reduction, or ORC, argues that consciousness is generated by quantum computations in protein structures called microtubules inside neurons. These quantum computations involve the collapse of quantum superpositions, the process by which a quantum system that exists in multiple states simultaneously resolves into one definite state. If consciousness is generated by quantum collapse events, and quantum collapse events are genuinely indeterministic, then consciousness might have access to a source of genuine indeterminacy that is not reducible to prior causes. The Penrose-Hameroff hypothesis is controversial. Most neuroscientists and physicists do not accept it. The brain is a warm, wet, noisy environment, and quantum coherence, the property that makes quantum computation work, typically requires extremely cold, isolated conditions to be maintained for any significant time. The standard view is that any quantum coherence in the brain would decohere in picoseconds, far too fast to play any role in the neural computations that underlie cognition. But let us grant, for the sake of argument, that the brain does have some quantum processes, and that those processes introduce genuine indeterminacy into its operation. Does this give us free will? No. This is the crucial point, and it is easy to miss because the word undetermined sounds like it ought to be related to free. But undetermined and free are completely different properties. Think about what you want free will to mean. You want your decisions to be yours. You want them to reflect your values, your reasons, your deliberation. You want to be the author of your choices. The freedom you care about is the freedom of self-authorship. Randomness is the opposite of self-authorship. A decision that is genuinely random, determined by the quantum mechanical collapse of a superposition in a neural microtubule, is not more your decision than a deterministic decision. It is less. It does not reflect your values. It does not track your reasons. It just happens by chance at a particular quantum indeterminate moment. Imagine that you are deliberating about whether to tell the truth or lie in a difficult conversation. You think through the reasons, consult your values, feel the weight of the competing considerations, and then according to the quantum free will hypothesis, your decision is made by the random collapse of a quantum state in a microtubule. The collapse could have gone either way. It happened to go the way it did. Is this freedom? You did not choose it. Your reasons and values did not determine it. Quantum chance determined it. This is not freedom. This is randomness. And randomness is, if anything, more hostile to the kind of freedom we care about than determinism is. At least in determinism, your decision flows from your character and values, even if your character and values were themselves determined. In the quantum randomness picture, your decision does not even flow from your character. It flows from quantum chance. You are, in the most literal sense, a dice-rolling machine. Daniel Dennett makes this point with characteristic sharpness. He calls it the whichever way the wind blows argument. Suppose you are wrestling with a moral decision. You think carefully, consult your values, and then quantum chance intervenes. Which way did the wind blow? Heads, you do the right thing, tails, you do the wrong thing, determined by a random quantum event. This is not moral agency. This is moral helplessness dressed up in quantum vocabulary. The argument from quantum indeterminacy against Laplace's demon is legitimate as far as it goes. The universe is probably not fully deterministic at the quantum level. Laplace's demon, as described, is almost certainly not possible in practice. But this is irrelevant to the question of free will. The question is not whether the universe is deterministic. The question is whether you, the person lying here, have genuine libertarian freedom. And libertarian freedom is not randomness. Libertarian freedom is the capacity to originate your own actions based on reasons that are genuinely your own. Quantum randomness provides undetermination, not self-origination. It removes one form of unfreedom and replaces it with a different one. There is a second appeal to physics that is worth addressing: chaos theory. Even in classical, deterministic physics, the future is practically unpredictable because of sensitivity to initial conditions. A tiny difference in the present state leads, over time, to radically different futures. The classic example is the weather. The atmosphere is governed by deterministic physical laws, but it is so sensitive to initial conditions that accurate long-range forecasting beyond a few days is practically impossible. Edward Lorenz discovered this in the early 1960s, when he found that rounding a number from 0.506, 127 to 0.506 in his weather simulation, produced a completely different forecast over time. This sensitivity is what Lorenz called the butterfly effect. The brain is a chaotic system in this sense. Its dynamics are exquisitely sensitive to small fluctuations. A tiny change in the concentration of a neurotransmitter could, in principle, tip a decision one way rather than another. In practice, the future of the brain is practically unpredictable. You cannot, in practice, know what your next thought will be, and neither can anyone else. But unpredictability is not freedom. The weather is unpredictable. The weather is not free. The butterfly's effect on the hurricane is fully causal. The butterfly's wing flaps set in motion a chain of physical events that contributed to the hurricane's formation. The chain is causal all the way through. The unpredictability comes from our limited ability to measure and compute, not from any failure of causation. Similarly, the unpredictability of the brain's dynamics does not mean those dynamics are uncaused. They are caused. The causes are complex and sensitive to tiny perturbations, making long-range prediction impossible in practice. But the causal chain is intact. Your next thought was caused by the current state of your brain. The current state of your brain was caused by prior states. The prior states were caused by prior states. All the way back, neither quantum randomness nor chaotic unpredictability gives us what libertarian free will requires. What libertarian free will requires is a genuine origination, a capacity to produce actions that are neither determined by prior causes nor produced by random chance, but produced by you, genuinely and freely, as an uncaused cause. Physics does not offer this. Physics offers determination or randomness, and neither of those is freedom in the sense we care about. The escape hatch is closed. So far, we have been following the argument. Let's step back now and ask the practical question. If you actually believe this, if you take hard determinism seriously, not just as an intellectual position, but as a fact about your life and the lives of everyone around you, what changes? The honest answer is everything and nothing. Nothing changes about the physics. Nothing changes about the causal structure of the future. But something changes about the emotional and moral weight you assign to events. And that is not nothing. Start with criminal justice. This is where the implications of determinism are most urgent and most contested. The philosopher and neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky published a book in 2023 called Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. It is the most comprehensive recent account of the biological case against free will and its implications for how we think about behavior and responsibility. Sapolsky's central argument is that every aspect of human behavior, including the behaviors we call criminal, evil, or blameworthy, is the product of biology. Genes, hormones, brain development, early childhood experience, socioeconomic conditions, chance exposures to violence or trauma. Everything that produces a person who does a terrible thing was itself produced by factors that person did not control. The implication Sapolsky draws is not that we should stop preventing harmful behavior. We should prevent it, contain it, protect people from it. But the retributive justification for punishment, the idea that the person deserves to suffer for what they did, that their suffering is itself a form of justice, dissolves when you take seriously that they could not have done otherwise. Consider two ways of thinking about a person who commits a violent crime. The first way, they made a choice. They could have controlled themselves, but they didn't. They are responsible for what they did. They deserve to suffer for it. The purpose of prison is, in significant part, to make them suffer in proportion to the harm they caused. The second way, they were produced by a set of factors, genetic predispositions towards certain emotional responses, early childhood trauma that shaped the architecture of their stress response systems, socioeconomic conditions that closed off other paths, a specific chain of events that led them to that moment, none of which they chose. Given exactly those factors, the outcome was inevitable. The question is not whether they deserve to suffer, but what response will most effectively reduce future harm. The second way leads to very different institutions, less focused on punishment, more focused on rehabilitation, prevention, and addressing the underlying factors that produce harmful behavior. More focused on changing the inputs to the system than on exacting retribution from the outputs. The standard objection to this is that it would dissolve all moral accountability. If no one is ultimately responsible, how can we hold anyone to account for anything? If Hitler couldn't have done otherwise, how can we condemn him? The determinist answer is careful here. We can and must condemn harmful actions, and dangerous people condemn them as harmful, as wrong, as things that must be stopped. We can and must incapacitate people who pose continuing danger to others. We can and must make the strongest possible moral and emotional case for the values that were violated. None of that requires ultimate desert. None of that requires the retributive addition of, and therefore this person deserves to suffer. You can fully condemn the action, fully oppose the person, fully work to ensure it does not happen again, all without the additional layer of believing that the person deserves to have bad things happen to them, as an end in itself. The determinist argument is not a get-out-of-jail argument. It is an argument about the justification of punishment. Deterrence is fully compatible with determinism. The threat of punishment is an input to the causal system, and it changes behavior. Incapacitation is fully compatible with determinism. Keeping someone who poses a danger away from people they would harm is simply causal prevention. Rehabilitation is fully compatible with determinism, changing the inputs, education, therapy, skills, environment, to produce different outputs. What is not compatible with determinism is retribution. The idea that suffering is deserved as an end in itself, that bad people should suffer because they chose to be bad. Now descend from criminal justice to the personal. Think about something you did that you regret, something you are genuinely ashamed of, a moment when you were unkind, or cowardly, or dishonest, when you did something you knew was wrong, or failed to do something you knew was right. You carry that. Most people carry a number of these. They return at inconvenient moments in the middle of the night, in quiet pauses, in otherwise busy days. You replay them. You judge yourself. You think, I should have known better. I should have done better. I was better than that, and I failed to be. Hard determinism asks you to look at that moment differently. Given the exact configuration of your brain at that moment, the neural state produced by your genetics, your upbringing, your past experiences, your hormonal state, your levels of tiredness, your prior emotional activation. Every input that had entered your system up to that instant, given all of that exactly as it was, could you have done differently? The hard determinist answer is no. Given exactly those conditions, that action was the only possible outcome. The brain in that state, operating according to physical laws, produced that behavior. It could not have produced anything else. This is not an excuse. The action happened. The consequences are real. The harm is real. The failure was real. But the grinding self-punishment that attaches to it the sense that you, the free agent, chose to be that person in that moment, and could have chosen differently, and therefore you are fundamentally bad, may be less warranted than it feels. Self-compassion, on the hard determinist account, is not weakness. It is accuracy. You were the product of causes you did not choose, acting in a moment whose conditions you did not fully control, producing the only output that those conditions could produce. The recognition of this is not an avoidance of responsibility. It is a more honest account of what responsibility means when you look at it carefully. The mirror image of this is pride. Think of the achievements you are most proud of. The moments when you feel you earned something, accomplished something, demonstrated something. The hard determinist view applies here too. Your achievements are the outputs of a system that was formed by factors you did not choose. Your intelligence, if you have it, was given to you. Your work ethic, if you have it, was shaped by experiences that happened to you. Your capacity for discipline for creativity, for care, all of it developed from conditions you did not control. This does not mean your achievements are not yours. They are yours in the sense that they were produced by your system. But the system was produced by luck, by the fortunate combination of genetic endowments and circumstances that resulted in a person capable of those achievements. Gratitude becomes more fitting than pride. You are fortunate. You were produced fortunately. The appropriate response to recognizing that your advantages are largely given is gratitude toward the people and circumstances that formed you, rather than the self-congratulation of believing you alone built yourself. And the appropriate response to other people's disadvantages is compassion rather than contempt. The person who is struggling with addiction, with violence, with failure, with moral weakness, was also produced by their causes. They did not choose the genetics and the experiences that made them someone who struggles with those things. This does not mean accepting harm. It does not mean refusing to enforce boundaries or protect yourself. It means the emotional register shifts from contempt and retributive anger to something cooler and more accurate, a recognition of causal structure, a focus on what can be changed going forward, a letting go of the satisfaction of blame that does nothing to address the underlying causes. Resentment, the hard determinist notices, requires the belief that the other person could have done otherwise. Genuine, sustained resentment, the kind that corrodes from inside, requires the conviction that the person freely chose to hurt you. When you trace their behavior back through its causes, through the system that produced them, through the circumstances that formed that system, all the way back to factors that began before they were born, the resentment becomes harder to sustain. Not because what they did was okay. It was not okay. But because blaming them for being the product of their causes is like blaming a storm for the rain. You can still be angry. You can still set boundaries. You can still remove yourself from harm. But the retributive layer, they deserve to suffer. They are fundamentally bad. They chose this. That layer becomes philosophically unjustifiable once you follow the causal chain all the way back. Hard determinism, followed seriously, produces a particular emotional temperature. Not indifference, not passivity, not the collapse of all evaluation, but a kind of clarity that comes from seeing things as they are, as caused systems, operating according to laws, producing the outputs. They produce. You engage with the outputs. You respond to them. You change what can be changed. But you are no longer carrying the extra weight of ultimate attribution, ultimate deserving, ultimate blame. That weight is heavy. You may not have noticed how heavy until you try to put it down. We are near the end. Let's talk about why this particular illusion is the last one. The history of science is, in part, a history of dethroning, a long series of moments in which human beings discovered that something they thought was special about themselves or their position was not. Each discovery displaced them from a position of privilege. Each displacement was resisted, and then accepted, and then incorporated into a new, slightly more accurate picture of what they were. The Copernican revolution displaced humans from the center of the universe. You are on a planet, orbiting a star, in a galaxy among hundreds of billions of galaxies. You are not special by location. The Darwinian revolution displaced humans from their claimed biological uniqueness. You are an animal, a highly developed, linguistically sophisticated, socially complex animal, but continuous with the rest of life on this planet. You are not special by origin. The Freudian and cognitive revolutions displaced humans from the assumption of transparent self-knowledge. You do not have direct, accurate access to your own motivations. Your memories are unreliable. Your perceptions are constructed. Your intuitions about your own inner life are frequently wrong. You are not special by self-knowledge. And now the determinist revolution, if we accept it fully, displaces humans from the assumption of genuine authorship. You are not the ultimate source of your actions. You are the current output of a causal system running back to the beginning of time. You are not special by freedom. Each previous displacement was painful. Each was resisted. Each is still, in some sense, not fully assimilated. You still experience yourself as being at the center of your perceptual field, as being meaningfully distinct from other animals, as having some privileged access to your own mind. The intellectual revisions are accepted, but the phenomenology resists them. The free will revision is the hardest because it is the most interior. All the previous displacements were about the outside, about your position in the universe, your biological history, the reliability of your perception of external things. The free will displacement is about the inside, about who you are, about what it means to be you at all. The feeling of being someone who chooses the fiat, the author behind the actions, is not a belief you hold about an external object. It is identical to the experience of being a self. To give it up is not to revise a belief about the world. It is to revise the structure of what experience feels like from the inside. This is why you will not fully give it up. No argument, however rigorous, however well evidenced, will fully extinguish the feeling of choosing. The feeling is generated by the brain's ongoing activity, moment by moment, as a feature of consciousness rather than as a conclusion of reasoning. Arguments operate on beliefs. The feeling of free will is not a belief. It is a structural feature of conscious experience. You can believe it is an illusion while experiencing it. You can understand, intellectually, that your next thought was already determined before you were born, while still having the experience of your next thought arising, as if from your own spontaneous initiative. Sam Harris describes this clearly. The feeling of authorship, the sense that you are generating your thoughts from some inner place, does not go away when you understand it is generated by the brain. The understanding does not dispel the phenomenology. What changes is the relationship to the phenomenology. You can hold the experience lightly, with the knowledge that it is an experience, not a report of deep metaphysical freedom. You can notice it without fully believing it. This noticing is not a cure, but it is a shift. Buddhist philosophy has been making a version of this point for 2,500 years. The self, the continuous, authoring, freely willing self is, on the Buddhist account, a construction, a narrative produced by the mind's activity, moment by moment, with no fixed underlying entity. Meditation practice, in many Buddhist traditions, is precisely the practice of sitting with the activity of the mind and noticing that the thoughts arise. They are not produced by a thinker. They are just arising, appearing in consciousness, passing away. The thinker is the story the mind tells about the arising. It is not a fixed entity behind the scenes. The Buddhist analysis and the neuroscientific analysis are surprisingly convergent. Both say, look carefully at your experience. What you think of as a self-making choices is actually a process producing experiences that include the feeling of being a self-making choices. The feeling is real. The entity it implies may not be. There is something almost restful about this, once you can hold it without terror. The terror comes from the first pass at the idea, when it feels like annihilation. If I am not free, then I am not real. If my choices are not genuine, then I am not a genuine person. The person who makes choices, who bears responsibility, who has a history and a character, this person feels like it requires free will to exist. Without free will, you vanish. But this is wrong. You do not vanish. You are still here. The processes are still running. The character still exists. The deliberations are still occurring. The actions are still being produced, and they are still yours in the sense that they are produced by your system and not by any other system. What dissolves is not you. What dissolves is the extra layer, the layer of ultimate uncaused authorship, of absolute desert, of the libertarian freedom that the philosophical analysis and the neuroscience and the physics all converge in denying. And that layer, it turns out, was carrying most of the weight of self-blame and other blame that may have been making things heavier than they needed to be. As you lie here tonight, in the dark, getting very close to sleep, consider the activity of your mind right now. Thoughts are arising. You did not choose them. They appeared, produced by the vast unconscious machinery of the brain running its processes beneath and before consciousness. Some thoughts feel significant. Some feel trivial. You have no control over which ones appear. You have no control over the order in which they come. They arise. You watch them arise. Is that watching that, witnessing what you mean by you? Is the you that matters the arising of thoughts, or the awareness of their arising? And if it is the awareness, does that awareness need to be free in the libertarian sense to be real and valuable and worth caring about? The brain is going to keep running tonight. It will run while you sleep. Dreams will occur. Memories will consolidate. The body will be maintained. The extraordinary machinery of biological life will continue without any deliberating self in charge. The deliberating self will be gone, or mostly gone, for several hours. And you will be fine. More than fine. You will be rested. The deliberating self, the one that makes choices and carries responsibility and plans the future and remembers the past and worries about both, is exhausting. It runs continuously all day. It constructs the narrative of your life, maintains the feeling of being someone, keeps track of the infinite small decisions that constitute a life being lived. It does not stop until sleep stops it. Tonight, it stops. The machinery continues, but the story the machinery tells about itself, the story of a free agent authoring a life, goes quiet. Maybe the universe doesn't require that story. Maybe the universe just requires the process. And maybe the process, running without the story, is what rest actually is. Whether or not free will is ultimately real, whether or not the hard determinists are right in every detail, whether or not compatibilism rescues something worth saving. The process of following the argument this far has done something. It has made the question serious. It has made the concept of the self that makes choices less obvious, less automatic, less immune to examination. The last illusion may be the hardest to give up. But tonight, for a few hours, you don't have to hold it. The system runs without you. It has always run without you. It runs right now. The problem of free will is not only a scientific and philosophical problem. It is a theological problem of the first order, and it has been tormenting religious thinkers for as long as there have been religious thinkers. If God is omniscient, if God knows everything, including the future, then God knew, before you were born, every choice you would ever make. God knew, before the world was created, that you would be reading this tonight, that you would make every decision you have ever made. that you would do everything you will do until you die. God's foreknowledge is perfect and complete. Now, if God knew before you were born that you would lie on a particular Tuesday, how could you have done otherwise on that Tuesday? If God knew your doing otherwise on that Tuesday was impossible. The knowledge was of the actual future, not a possible future. If the Tuesday lie was the actual future, then not lying on that Tuesday was not the actual future. It was a counterfactual that never occurred. How can you be said to have freely chosen the lie if the not lying was never a real possibility? This is the problem of divine foreknowledge and free will, and it has occupied theologians from Augustine through Aquinas, through Calvin and Arminius to the present. The solutions proposed are sophisticated and numerous, and none of them is fully satisfying. Augustine, in the early 5th century, took a position that is essentially compatibilist. God foreknows what you will freely do. The foreknowledge does not cause the doing. The doing is free. The foreknowledge is simply God's eternal awareness of the free event. Just as your knowing that the sun will rise tomorrow does not cause the sun to rise, God's knowing what you will do does not cause you to do it. This is elegant, and it is one of the earliest formulations of what we now call compatibilism, the position that freedom and causal or epistemic determination are compatible. But the hard determinist's response applies here too. Even if God's foreknowledge doesn't cause your action, the foreknowledge tells us that the action was determined. God's knowledge is not of what you might freely do. It is of what you will actually do. The will God knows was already set. Calvin drew the logical conclusion that Augustine tried to avoid. If God foreknows everything, and God is also the source of everything, then God predestines everything. The doctrine of predestination, that some souls are elected to salvation and others to damnation before they are born, according to God's sovereign will and not according to their own choices, follows from taking divine omniscience and sovereignty seriously. Calvin did not flinch from this. He accepted it. He called it a terrible decree, but he accepted it. The Arminian response, the Protestant tradition associated with Jacobus Arminius, and later with John Wesley and Methodism, tried to preserve both divine foreknowledge and genuine human freedom by arguing that God's foreknowledge is conditional. God knows what you will freely do, not by predetermining it, but by perceiving the entire timeline, including your free choices, from outside of time. God sees what you choose, rather than choosing for you. The Molinist response, developed by Luis de Molina in the 16th century, introduced the concept of middle knowledge, God's knowledge, not only of what will actually happen, but of what would happen in every possible set of circumstances. God knows not just what you will do, but what you would do if different circumstances obtained. God uses this middle knowledge to arrange the circumstances of your life such that your free choices produce the outcome God desires. These are theologically sophisticated positions. None of them escapes the underlying problem for the hard determinist. Whether the determination comes from God's sovereign will, from God's foreknowledge, or from God's arrangement of circumstances, the hard determinist says the same thing. The outcome was settled before you made it. The sense that you could have done otherwise was an illusion. The theological tradition actually confirms the hard determinist's point. The most careful, most rigorous theological thinkers, grappling with the implications of omniscience, have consistently found themselves either accepting some form of determination or resorting to compatibilist redefinitions of freedom. that the hard determinist finds unsatisfying for the same reasons that secular compatibilism is unsatisfying. The God-shaped version of the problem is the mirror of the physics-shaped version. Both ask the same question. How does a choice that was settled before it was made count as a choice? And both face the same answer. Perhaps the question is being asked from the wrong angle. Perhaps the sense of settling is the mechanism of the choice, not a contradiction of it. But perhaps not. There is a deeper dimension to the free will problem that goes beyond the question of whether decisions are caused by prior states. It concerns the nature of the self that is supposed to be making the decisions. The ordinary picture of free will involves a unified, continuous self, a subject of experience that persists through time, deliberates, decides and takes responsibility for the consequences. This self has a memory, an identity, values, and the capacity to reflect on all of these and act from reflective endorsement of them. The self is the author. The decisions are its productions. But the picture of the self that emerges from neuroscience is very different. There is no unified, continuous, clearly bounded self in the brain. There is a set of processes, memory systems, emotional systems, language systems, motor systems, attentional systems, social cognition systems that interact to produce behavior and the experience of being someone. The unity is a construction. The continuity is a construction. The authorship narrative is a construction. Michael Gazzaniga is a neuroscientist who has spent decades studying split-brain patients in whom the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerve fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres, has been severed to control severe epilepsy. In these patients, the two hemispheres cannot communicate directly. They function as partially separate cognitive systems. Gazzaniga's research revealed something extraordinary. When information is presented exclusively to the left hemisphere, and the patient is asked to act on it, the left hemisphere acts but does not know why. When the right hemisphere simultaneously acts on different information, the left hemisphere invents an explanation for the right hemisphere's action, without realizing it doesn't know the real cause. In one famous experiment, a split-brain patient's right hemisphere was shown the word walk, and the left hemisphere was shown nothing. The patient got up and walked across the room. When asked why the question going to the verbal left hemisphere, which had no access to the word walk, the patient said, "I needed to get a Coke." The left hemisphere had no access to the real cause of the behavior. It invented a cause, smoothly, confidently, without any sense of confabulation. The explanation felt like knowledge. It was fabrication. Gazzaniga named this tendency of the left hemisphere. The interpreter, its role is to construct post hoc narratives that explain behavior in terms of coherent reasons and intentions, even when the actual causes were unknown to it. The interpreter is, he argues, one of the most important functions of the brain, and it is constantly producing the narrative of a unified self making coherent choices, for good reasons. Most of the time, the narrative is broadly accurate, but its accuracy is not guaranteed by the mechanism. The mechanism is a storytelling system, not a truth-tracking system. It tells stories that are typically plausible and often false. When you introspect about why you made a decision, when you articulate your reasons, explain your motivations, describe your deliberation, you are largely listening to the interpreter. You are listening to the brain's narrative about what happened. The narrative is usually coherent and plausible. It may or may not accurately reflect the actual causal processes that produce the behavior. Timothy Wilson, in his book Strangers to Ourselves, summarizes decades of research on unconscious mental processes and their relationship to conscious experience. The conclusion he draws is that the adaptive unconscious, the vast, fast, automatic processing systems that underlie most of human behavior, is largely inaccessible to introspection. We explain our behavior in terms of conscious reasons and deliberations that may have little to do with the unconscious processes that actually drove the behavior. The person who expresses a racist preference in a controlled study and then explains their preference in terms of entirely non-racial factors is not lying. They are reporting what the interpreter told them. The interpreter produced a plausible race-neutral narrative for a preference that the automatic processing systems generated on racial grounds. The person does not know the real cause. They report the constructed narrative. This happens constantly for most human behavior, not just for taboo behaviors, for ordinary preferences, for social judgments, for aesthetic choices, for moral intuitions. The interpreter is busy, and its productions are confident and usually feel like accurate self-knowledge. The self that feels like it is freely choosing is, in large part, the interpreter. It is the narrative generated after the fact, or sometimes in parallel, to explain behavior that was actually produced by processes the narrative self had no access to and did not control. This is not to say there is no self. The processes are real. The narrative is part of the process, but the sense that there is a unified authoring self behind the processes, a homunculus running the show, is a construction. The show runs itself. The homunculus is part of the show. There is a thought experiment in philosophy that puts the free will problem in the sharpest personal terms. It is called the case of the two drunk drivers. Two people go out on a Saturday night. Both drink too much. Both drive home. Both are being reckless in a way they know is wrong. One of them happens to hit and kill a pedestrian. The other makes it home without incident. From the perspective of desert of what each person deserves, they seem equivalent. They made the same reckless decision. They exercised the same poor judgment. They created the same level of risk. The only difference between their situations was the location of a pedestrian at a specific moment in time, which neither of them knew about, and neither of them controlled. The pedestrian's presence or absence was a matter of luck. Yet we treat them very differently. The one who killed someone will be charged with vehicular manslaughter or vehicular homicide, lose their license, quite possibly go to prison. Their life may be permanently altered. The one who made it home safely will wake up the next morning, perhaps with a hangover and some guilt, but essentially undamaged by the legal and social consequences. The difference between them is luck. Pure, uncontrolled, meaningless luck. Thomas Nagel, in his classic essay Moral Luck, argues that our practices of moral judgment are riddled with this kind of luck, and that this is deeply problematic. We hold people responsible for outcomes that were partly determined by factors outside their control. We calibrate our moral judgments by the results, when the results were not fully within the agent's control. Nagel identifies 4 kinds of moral luck. Resultant luck, the kind in the drunk driving case. Circumstantial luck, whether you happen to find yourself in circumstances that give you the opportunity to do good or evil. Constitutive luck, the kind of person you happen to be. Your impulses, capacities and temperament. And causal luck, whether your actions are determined by prior causes. The hard determinist is most interested in constitutive and causal luck. Constitutive luck is the luck of being born with the particular brain, temperament, and character that you have. You did not choose to be the kind of person who is susceptible to certain temptations and resistant to others. The kind of person with this level of empathy and that level of impulse control. You were produced as this kind of person by your genetics and your early development. The character that your choices express was given to you. This is the ultimate depth of the moral luck problem. It is not just that bad outcomes might follow from good decisions by bad luck of circumstance. It is that the quality of the decision itself, the goodness or badness of the character from which it flows, was also a matter of luck. Whether you are the kind of person who makes good decisions in difficult circumstances is not something you chose. It was formed in you by processes you did not control. Nagel does not conclude from this that moral judgment should be abandoned, but he argues that the problem is genuine and deep. Our practices of holding people responsible are in tension with the degree of luck that penetrates moral agency at every level. We cannot fully resolve this tension by pretending the luck is not there. The hard determinist takes the moral luck argument to its conclusion. All moral luck, all the way down. The character from which your choices flow is entirely the product of factors you did not choose. This does not mean evaluations are meaningless. It means that the retributive component of moral judgment, the sense that someone deserves to suffer because of who they freely chose to be, is built on a foundation that dissolves under examination. You are fortunate to be the kind of person who makes mostly good choices. You did not earn that fortune by being the kind of person who chose to be the kind of person who makes good choices. You were produced that way. The appropriate response to recognizing this in yourself and in others is not pride and contempt, but gratitude and compassion, which are, it turns out, more useful emotions anyway. There is a paradox at the heart of the hard determinist position that is worth sitting with before we let it go. The hard determinist says you are not free. Your choices were inevitable. The future is already determined. And yet the hard determinist also says this understanding changes something. It makes self-blame less rational. It makes retributive anger less defensible. It makes gratitude more appropriate than pride. It makes compassion more accurate than contempt. But if the future is already determined, then whether you absorb this understanding and change your emotional register, or whether you reject it and continue in resentment and self-blame, that too was already determined. The question of whether reading this changes you was settled before you were born. Either the physics produces a person who loosens their grip on the illusion tonight, or it produces a person who holds it as firmly as ever. The hard determinist accepts this. Even the act of following the argument is determined. Even the potential change in perspective is determined. Even the writing of this and the hearing of it was the inevitable output of a physical process set in motion 14 billion years ago. Does this mean that sharing the argument is pointless? That the argument cannot change anything because everything was already determined? No. And here is why. The argument changes things if it changes things. If hearing this produces, in some people, a loosening of the grip on the illusion, if it leads to slightly less self-blame, slightly less retributive anger, slightly more compassion, then it has done something. The fact that the change was itself determined does not mean it didn't happen. Determined changes are still changes. The determined future is still the future. This is the compatibilist's best point, and it is worth granting the fact that you are determined to deliberate does not make your deliberation causally inert. Deliberation is part of the causal chain. When you think carefully about a decision, the thinking is a cause of the outcome. Being determined to think carefully is being caused to have a cause. The causal chain runs through you. The thinking that runs through you makes a difference to where the chain goes. You are not free from the physics, but you are the physics. And the physics that you are makes a real difference to what happens. Accepting this is not giving up the argument. It is completing it. The freedom that is real, the only freedom the universe permits, is the freedom of being exactly what you are, fully and without resistance, as a link in the causal chain that runs from the beginning of time to whatever comes after. That link is you. It could not be otherwise. It will be exactly what it is. And tonight, as the deliberating mind quiets and the physical processes continue in the dark, the link rests. Tomorrow, the chain continues. It has never stopped. There is a case in the history of neurology that the hard determinist finds almost impossible to ignore. It is the case of Charles Whitman. On August 1st, 1966, Charles Whitman climbed to the observation deck of the University of Texas Tower in Austin and opened fire on the campus below. He killed 17 people and wounded 31 others over 96 minutes, until he was shot and killed by police. It was one of the first mass shootings in American history, and the first to attract large-scale national media coverage. Before the shooting, Whitman had gone to his mother's apartment and killed her. Then he returned home and killed his wife. He left a note. The note is worth reading carefully, because it is the note of a man who knew something was wrong with him and could not understand it. He wrote, "I do not quite understand what it is that compels me to type this letter. Perhaps it is to leave some vague reason for the actions I have recently performed. I do not really understand myself these days. I am supposed to be an average, reasonable and intelligent young man. However, lately, I cannot recall one instance where I felt being a good human being. I have been having fears and violent impulses. I had decided to kill my wife after I pick her mother up from the nursing home. I love her dearly, and she has been a fine wife to me as any man could ever hope to have. I cannot rationally pinpoint any specific reason for doing this." He asked that an autopsy be performed on him after his death. He suspected there was something physically wrong with his brain. There was. The autopsy revealed a glioblastoma, a malignant brain tumor, growing in the region of the hypothalamus and pressing on the amygdala. The amygdala is the brain structure most critically involved in fear, aggression, and emotional regulation. Pressure on the amygdala from a growing tumor can produce exactly the kinds of violent impulses, emotional dysregulation, and behavioral disinhibition that Whitman described in his note. The University of Texas Governor's Commission that investigated the shooting concluded that the tumor had likely contributed to Whitman's deteriorating mental state and his violent behavior. This case does not resolve the free will debate. Most people who have amygdala tumors do not become mass shooters. Most mass shooters do not have amygdala tumors. The relationship between brain pathology and behavior is statistical and contextual, not deterministic in any simple one-to-one way. But the case forces the question with unusual clarity. Here is a man who knew something was wrong, who described impulses he did not want to have, who loved his wife and killed her, who asked, in his own note, for his brain to be examined after his death, because he suspected that what was happening to him was happening in his brain and was not fully him. The hard determinist says, "This is the structure of all behavior, made visible. The tumor makes explicit what is always true. The impulse to violence arose from a physical cause. The physical cause operated on a brain. The brain produced behavior. The person who experienced these impulses was a witness to them as much as an author of them. Most of the time, the causes of our impulses and decisions are not tumors. They are the ordinary architecture of the brain, the synaptic weights shaped by genetics and experience, the hormonal environment, the subtle variations in neurotransmitter levels, the accumulated pattern of a lifetime of neural development. The causes are invisible. The effects feel like choices. Charles Whitman's tumor made the cause briefly visible. He could see that something was producing his impulses from outside his will. He could see that the impulses did not feel like his, and he still could not stop them. The Determinist says, the only difference between Whitman and any other person acting on a violent impulse is the visibility of the cause. In Whitman's case, the cause was a tumor you could see on a scan. In other cases, the causes are the invisible architecture of genetics and development and circumstance. The invisibility of the cause in ordinary cases is what allows us to maintain the illusion that the impulse was chosen. This is the hard determinist's most powerful empirical argument. Not Laplace's demon, which is abstract. Not the Libet Experiment, which is about tiny voluntary movements. But the steady accumulation of cases in which changes to the physical brain produce changes to behavior, including changes to the behavior called deciding, choosing, valuing, caring. Every case of frontotemporal dementia in which a previously gentle person becomes cruel. Every case of Parkinson's medication in which dopamine agonists produce compulsive gambling. Every case of a stroke that produces a different person in a previously familiar body. Every case of early childhood trauma that produces specific, predictable patterns of adult behavior. Every case of a genetic predisposition to addiction or violence that expresses itself in specific environmental triggers. The brain is the chooser. What happens to the brain happens to the choices. There is no separate compartment where genuine freedom persists, immune to the physical changes that alter everything else. Whitman asked for his brain to be examined. He had the intuition in the last days of his life that the answer was in there. He was right. The answer has always been in there. For all of us, we just haven't looked as closely. The person you are tonight, the one lying here, following these thoughts, noticing the thoughts arise without choosing them, was produced by the brain you have. The brain you have was produced by genetics, development, experience, and the long chain of causes that preceded all of them. The thoughts you are having right now were not chosen by you. They were produced by the physical state of your brain. The physical state of your brain was the inevitable consequence of everything that preceded it. You are watching thoughts arise. You are not producing them. And as sleep approaches, as the neural activity shifts from the wakeful modes to the sleeping modes, as the default mode network quiets and the brainstem takes over the regulation of the body, the sense of being the watcher also dims. The watching was itself a product of the machinery. When the machinery enters sleep mode, the watcher rests too. There is nothing to hold on to. The process runs. It has always run. Tonight, it runs in the dark. Let it.